with Eric Douglas and Isaac LaFawn. What's up, fellas?
How's it going?
Going well, man.
So you guys ready for the 4th? Now, we're recording the show. This is the week right before the 4th of July. So you guys got big plans or anything?
No big plans whatsoever. Apparently, they're already shooting fireworks across the country in certain cities. So
I was going to say, in downtown Louisville, you can go down there and see fireworks almost every night.
just about, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know what it is about our neighborhood, though, but we've got so I live in Oldham County, and right across the line is they have a tent, because Jefferson County, you can't sell big fireworks. The pretty sparkly kind, but you can't sell the kind that goes boom. Well, right across the line, you can sell the stuff that goes boom. So our neighborhood, I guess people just trail up to that tent and buy stuff and go back and fire it, because it's all night for like 2 straight weeks. It's crazy. But anyway, so to get down to business today, so we thought we'd this is when the topic today we covered, we did this back when we had the radio show, and we actually got a number of calls on it. So we thought we'd do it in the podcast version, and what we're talking about are kind of these 3 retirement myths that we talk about as we're meeting with clients. So what I thought we'd do is we'll just throw one out there and each kind of go back and forth, and we'll talk about how we address that issue with clients. Mm-hmm. That work?
Yeah.
All right, so let's do the first one. This is the one I hear all the time. People come in and see me and they'll say, hey, I've always heard about this 3 to 4% withdrawal rate when I get into retirement. Like, that's all I can take. What do you guys think about that?
I think there's some fallacies.
Okay.
with the 3 to 4% rule. It's probably a good starting point for a discussion, but it's definitely by no means the end-all, be-all as far as what you should be doing when you're looking to plan for retirement income. Because when that rule was created back in the 90s, there was a number of assumptions that were made at that time that just don't really hold up. The first of which is, consistent returns over a period of time. So it's much more focused on the amount of returns within your portfolio than it is about the amount of income that actually is needed to be generated from the portfolio itself. It's one thing to look at percentages, but it's another thing to look at dollars. We spend dollars, we don't spend percentages, right? And so you need to plan for a specific amount of dollars coming into the bank every month, and you need to take in a number of different things into account, which a very generic 4% rule really doesn't account for.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, this always comes back to financial planning. I think it ultimately depends what are your assets currently in, what's the taxation of those assets, right? Taxes play a big role in, what your withdrawal rate could be, right?
Sure.
How that would work on the distribution. And yeah, I mean, it's a good way to think about it. I think that's a good point, Eric. I think you could use that as a rule of thumb. That still holds some water, but I think the best thing to do is to really sit down and look at the strategies and think about the goals around how much money do you need is probably more relevant than the percentage, right?
Yeah.
To actually answer the question is, kind of look through it.
Well, the reality too is, it's functional, or it's commonplace to say, okay, well, this is what I'm currently spending. This is what I'm going to need to spend in retirement, or this is, what my needs are, in order for me to cover all of my expenses and have some play money. The reality is, when you look at really the first 10 years or so of someone's retirement, their spending actually increases, because what do you do when you retire? You do all the things that you planned to do that you weren't able to do in your working life. You're traveling more, you're joining the country club, you're going out to eat a little bit more, you're buying that boat, you're buying a second home. Whatever it is, you're going to spend a little bit more money, generally speaking, in the first 10, maybe 15 years of your retirement, when you're still healthy, you still have your wits about you, and you can still functionally move around and do some of those things, and you're healthy enough to do it.
Yeah, so this is one that and we're going to talk about 3 today, but this is one that is really interesting to me, because I have had in the 17 going on almost 18 years of doing this. This is probably the one I hear the most around. Mm-hmm. It's 3 to 5%. It's gone down. Now it used to be kind of 3 to 6, and now it's gone from like 3 to 5. And really, because of where interest rates are today, it's more around 3 to 4% withdrawal rate. But here's the question I always ask when somebody comes in and says, presents that to me. Is your goal in retirement to leave your kids 100% of what you have today? Leave them everything. And they go, well, no. I said, okay, so really your goal in life is, throughout retirement, is to live your life, to live your retirement the way you want. And if there's anything left over at the end, the kids can go have a party, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, yeah, that's absolutely right. And I go, well, then you got to forget that whole 3 to 4% because what they're saying there is that your portfolio can produce on average 3 to 4% rate of return, dividends, interest income, so on, so that you'll never run out of money, i.e., the principal balance will always be there, and really you're just spending the interest made on the portfolio. That's the basis behind that 3 to 4% withdrawal rate. So if your goal is, out of all the years I've been doing this, and I've done hundreds and hundreds of plans, I've never once had a client come in and go, I want 100% of my assets today when I'm 60 years old. I want that to go to my kids. I don't want to spend a penny. I'm willing to sacrifice my retirement lifestyle so that my kids can blow my assets when I'm gone. I mean, that's essentially what they're saying, right?
I'm here today. I'd like that retirement endowment, please.
Yeah, right.
That's basically, right. I'd like to permanently endow my entire nest egg.
Yeah.
I'm joking, but that is basically what it is. Yeah,
that's exactly it.
Well, it's funny too because when I started, when I moved across to this side of the table and started dealing with clients directly as opposed to working with advisors, that was one of the biggest things that I saw that was really funny to me was most of the clients that you talk to, a lot of them don't particularly care how much they leave to their kids. They view that, hey, I worked hard for my money. This is the amount of money I want to spend. I certainly want to leave some, but it's certainly not like they want to leave, to your point, 100% of their nest egg.
Yeah, and so I would say the other point behind this one is it kind of goes back to what Isaac, which we always say, but you mentioned it first, is that it comes back to doing a financial plan. And we actually have software. It's pretty cool, but we can actually go in and show a client that don't worry about the 3 to 5% withdrawal rate. Don't worry about that. What you need to figure out is, and this will lead into next week's episode, we're talking about kind of what's your retirement number. That's going to, what I'm talking about right now will lead into that show, and that is what you need to figure out is how much assets you need to accumulate over the course of your life to then live the lifestyle that you want. And we can show you in our software that what your withdrawal rate is. And it's interesting because you'll see periods that, like Eric, what you mentioned a minute ago, if a client says, hey, I plan on, I don't know, traveling more or, doing whatever when they first get out of retirement, you'll see that withdrawal rate can be a little bit more. But then you'll go through periods where your withdrawal rate may only be 1 or 2%. And there could be years where it's 0, right? And then you're obviously, when you get older, medical expenses go up, you name it, you start giving away your money towards the end of your life. You want to see your grandkids enjoying your money. We see that a lot. So your withdrawal rate may go up 7, 8, 9, 10, 12%. I've seen that. So I will tell you that I just don't like that whole 3 to 4% withdrawal rate. I think you got to know how much you need to accumulate so that volume of assets can provide you the income that you want from now until the end of time. So I think it comes down to a plan, but again, that's just a myth that we don't agree with, is to go into retirement saying I can only spend 3 to 4% of what I accumulated.
Well, plus as well, you're going to be pulling from different accounts, and so some are going to be pre-tax accounts, some will be post-tax, some will be taxable, right? Yep. So if you pull the same amount of money from every single one of your accounts uniformly, that's not always going to be enough to cover the taxation of certain accounts versus others. So in all likelihood, that's not going to be enough to meet your actual, expenses.
Right. Yeah. All right. Let's move on. Number 2. This is one I think is hilarious, and I see this everywhere. Yeah. When you get into retirement, you should plan on 70. I say 70 to 80%. I've seen 75. I've seen 85% of your working income to support your lifestyle in retirement. Who in their right? I've never, again, another one of these nevers. I've never in the many years I'm doing this and hundreds of plans I've done, have I ever had a client say, you know what, I've worked my tail off for the last 40 plus years, 45 years. Now I want to get into retirement and I want to actually live a smaller lifestyle or off a smaller budget in retirement. I mean, I've never had anybody say that. Mm-hmm. Have you all?
Not at all.
No, I mean, I think it's the funny thing is how quick they get with the budgeting. they'll be like, yeah, if I wasn't working, I didn't have some of these expenses that I've been paying off my house and some other things, I just won't need very much. I'm like, well, that's interesting. A lot of people take on different hobbies that they haven't had time for. There's the travel factor, the kids, the grandkids, like all kinds of things, and you have to be specific. But yeah, rarely would I think I haven't seen a lot of people being willing to sacrifice or reduce their lifestyle.
Right.
Some people, the nature of their expenses or the nature of their hobbies, like it can work at that number somehow, but it's not a good way to do it.
No,
It's not an accurate way to do it at all.
Right, but the point behind all this whole conversation is you don't start to look, if you're 50, 55 years old, you don't look at this and say, this is what I'm going to plan for, right? You don't say, hey, I'm going to plan for living off 80% of my normal income at retirement, or I'm going to plan on a 3 to 4% withdrawal rate. That's just not what you say. Oh, hey, if I'm used to spending $5,000 a month when I'm working, you should want to live off $5,000 a month when you retire. You just have to make sure the numbers work. And again, it all goes back to a plan. You just got to make sure you pay yourself every month so that you can do that.
Mm-hmm. And the reality is you're going to have a lot more time to spend more money. I mean, if you go from working 40 hours plus a week to not, you suddenly have a lot of time on your hands, and you got to find things to do to fill that time.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, it's going to involve in some way, shape, or form having to spend some level of money.
I did tell you, it's a funny story. So this is the end of June of 2020 when we're recording the show. So depending on whenever you listen to it, kind of give you a frame of reference for the statement I'm getting ready to make. But I had a client retire at the end of January this year. And he was like, yeah, I'm gonna travel and I'm gonna do this and I'm gonna join the board. And so he came in last week and I was like, we started talking about budgeting. He was like, well, I got some extra surplus income right now. And I was like, what's going on? He goes, I can't do anything. All these big plans he had, he can't do any of it right now.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyway, but as a quick note, even though we are in we think maybe at the end or maybe in the middle of this COVID pandemic, the interesting thing is that, the savings rate, Eric, I think you brought this up, but I saw something over the weekend where it talked about the savings rate is through the roof. And they're talking about cash, just cash accumulated in bank accounts and investment accounts is huge. So
yeah, I think our job with our clients is to identify, I call them levers.
Yeah.
Where the actual conversation when people come in is like, this is what you can provide yourself if you work till this age or if you save at this rate or whatever. And then they start developing preferences, right? It's not 75 to 80% as a hard and fast rule. It's simply, wow, like I can do these things if I save or work till this age or some combination, right? It's to give them like the actual like chessboard of like, if you move your piece here and you do it this way, this is what your retirement could look like. And to give them actionable intel to like actually decide on the retirement lifestyle. It's certainly not something to get lazy when you work for 30 years and all of a sudden you have some arbitrary number and how you work on this little 4 or 5 year stretch of time in that part of your life makes such a huge impact on what it may look like for the rest of your life, right?
Yeah, I mean, so much of what we do isn't necessarily about telling you what to do or what you need to do with your money. It's more or less about laying out the options that you have in front of you. Yeah. If you continue to work for another 5 years versus, retiring at the end of this year, this is how it's going to affect your retirement in different ways. and so if we show you these options, we basically lay out the options and you can kind of choose your own adventure, if you will.
Yeah. Well, there's one guy, he was like, they've argued about a country club membership for 25 years of marriage. And I was like, maybe it's worth 6 months more work and savings to not argue about country club membership for another 35 years. Right. Just throwing it out there. Yeah. I just want some stuff for you to think about. But that's reality, right?
It is.
Retracting at retirement is not always making people feel that financial freedom they thought they were saving for their whole life.
Yeah, and the one thing I always tell clients is, our job is not to tell you how you spend your money. It's to show you the impact of how you spend your money. Yeah. It's the same thing, the same conversations I have with my little kids. Now, I'm not saying our clients are little kids, but you'll get my point. Well, maybe some are. No, I'm kidding. No, I'm kidding. No, but the point being that every decision you make in life has a consequence. Some are good or some are bad, but you have to know that when you make a decision about something, there's going to be a consequence somewhere. So to your point, Eric, to your point about the country club, if you make a decision to go down path A, which will give you the option and show you, hey, this is what it looks like if you go down path A, it may make you have to work another year or two to be able to do that. If you go down option B, you may be able to retire a year or so earlier. And I say that because we picked up a new client at the end of last year, and one of the things they were talking about was the wife was working in a job she didn't care for. It was very stressful to her, and it was causing some friction in the marriage. And so they were very open and honest about it. And, sometimes we have to be a little of a guidance counselor or, a therapist in a way. I mean, we do. I mean, because it involves money too. But what happened was they were very stressed, and she was wanting to retire early, and so they were kind of penny pinching now, and they weren't doing things today because they thought it was going to have an impact on them when they retired. So we did their financial plan, and we showed them, literally, we said, okay, if you retire when you say you want to retire, then we went back and showed them, we put in there they had some travel. That was kind of a vacation was their issue, and some other things. But we said, look, we built in $10,000 a year in vacations. We've already built that in there, and you're still successful. And so literally, I think I may have mentioned this in another podcast, same lady, but she started crying because they were so worried about, not spending money now so that she could retire, because it was causing friction in their marriage, and they were fighting over money, and we're like, look, why you don't have to do that. And we in fact built in something that you said you want to do, and you're still going to be successful. And so I think that's part of the impact of what we do is, again, showing people that, hey, you can, there's no reason to, to make sacrifices, or when you go down point A or path A or path B, there's consequences. But it all goes back to knowing whether you want to spend 100% or 80% or whatever of your retirement. We just don't buy into that, to that aspect. All right, so enough of that. Let's move on. Number 3, and our last one. This is one that's been very, very popular, and I still hear people talk about it. I still hear advisors talk about this, which I don't understand it, but I want to get your all's thoughts. So, Isaac, I'll come to you first on this one. Client comes in and says, hey, I'm 5 years away from retirement, and, while now I'm still saving, I want to be, I've done the risk profile. You've talked to them, and let's say they're a growth and income client, and they go, well, how are we going to make the progression to being conservative when I get into retirement? What's your conversation to them about that?
Yeah, so I always, I'll kind of point out, let's say they're 6 years old, or did you give me a specific age?
No.
Okay, yeah, so let's say they're 60 and they're retiring, and they've worked, almost 30 years.
Yep.
So I'll kind of say, well, let's take a look back when you were 25 or 30 years old. Even. Let's say you were 30.
Yep.
And you had planned on retiring when you were 60 years old. How were you investing when you were 30? I was pretty aggressive. Why is that? Because I wasn't going to use the money for 30 years. Okay.
Right.
What about when you were 35? Same answer, right? It's 25 years. What about when you're 40? 20 years. Of course, I understand the market goes around, but if I got time horizon in my favor, I can remain pretty aggressive. I'll say, well, you're retiring at 60 years old. What about money when you're 80? The income you're going to pay yourself when you're 80. So I'll kind of relate back to like their mindset when they were, I won't say younger, but more youthful.
Right.
And,
right.
And kind of say that, hey, like that mindset doesn't change. The same principles that you applied when you were that age are still applied to the stock market, even at retirement.
Yep.
And yes, you have to think about protecting stuff that you may use in the next 5 years and 10 years, and think about how you would treat all that money differently on all those different time frames, but still think about the fact that you still need to be growing money for your income needs when you're in your 70s and 80s, and certainly in your 90s.
Yeah, sure.
For sure. And if you allocate, if they do have, to your point, maybe they're not leaving all the money to their kids, but they do have a certain amount that they intend, as soon as they can quantify that, that's going to go to someone else, you start then treating that investment like it was maybe theirs. So if they're younger, then that money might stay aggressive even when they're, even later in years. So.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there was a stat I heard a long time ago in my career, and it really holds up today, and it's very eye-opening when I show it to clients. Basically, if you have a couple, and both spouses in a couple make it to the age of 65, there is over a 92% chance that at least one of those spouses will live to be the age of 90 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a couple that retires at 65 years old, it is very easy to assume that at least one member of that couple has at least a third of their life left to live. That's a long time to prepare for. You have to prepare for a 25, 30-year retirement when we're running these projections and these plans.
Yeah, so here's it's interesting, years and years and years ago, I think that actually probably held up fairly true. I think that, my grandparents' age, they weren't expected to live long. You retired at 62, you were dead by 70. In that case, I get it. I understand where you would say, I've saved all this money, now I need to be a little bit conservative. You just didn't expect to live that long. But that's just not the case today. I mean, I've got several clients that are in their late 80s, early 90s, and 30 years ago, no broker probably ever said that, on a rare occasion. But I've got several. So I think that's the issue. Just like what you guys are saying is, you have clients that are that retire, that are in retirement 30 years. I mean, think about that. 25 to 30 years is a long time to be in retirement. So I don't think you can just put everything on conservative cruise control and expect your assets to survive, 20, 25, 30 years in retirement.
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. So here's a quick story. So we got a client, he's 88 years old, and he comes in, and every year, just like you guys do, every year we sit down and we talk about his risk profile. Are you still at the same risk that you want to be? This guy's 88 years old, right? I mean, he's not a spring chicken. But the interesting thing is, every single year we've met, he's like, I'm still good. He's fairly aggressive. And he's super aggressive if you take all 88s and put them all, 88-year-old men and put them together. He's really aggressive. But the interesting thing is, what he told me, he retired at 60 years old. So he's been retired, was that 28 years, right? He was in the banking world. And his IRA, told me this, I don't know, like the 2 meetings ago. His IRA is, it's a considerable amount, okay? But when he retired, his balance is almost the same it is today. And he's taken out more than what he ever had in it to begin with, okay? Mm-hmm. So, it's a big number, okay? It's like $800,000. But it was about $800,000 when he retired. It's still about $800,000, and he's taken out almost $1.1 million over the course of his retirement. Mm-hmm. Yep. And he couldn't have done that had he been conservative. I'll tell you that story because had he said, I want to go in all bonds, he could have never done that. There's no way he would have ever been able to accomplish that. Yeah. But it's because he stayed invested. He was disciplined. It had some company stock in there, which has done really well. But that may not be everybody's same experience. But what I'm saying is, he never went conservative. He knew he had to continue to be invested in the market at the same risk, and he was just able to do that. So, not to say that everybody's going to have that same experience, but that's just a story to say that this guy took it, didn't take that approach, which we don't buy either.
Well, it's worth noting too. Think about what retirement looked like, back in the 80s, right? What were you getting on a CD at the bank?
Yeah.
I mean, you were getting close to double-digit returns in guaranteed fixed income. That doesn't exist anymore. Yeah. And even we were talking about the Rule of 4 earlier. When the Rule of 4 came out in the 90s, it was based on historical returns in the bond market in a 60-40 portfolio, basically earning historically over 5% in bond returns in the fixed income portion of your portfolio. That's not exactly a super realistic number in today's rate environment. Yep. So you actually need to prepare for the fact that, okay, if I move that conservative in my portfolio, historically speaking, yes, rates have always been this in fixed income. They're not necessarily that right now. And so you need to adjust. Okay, well, there's other ways to maybe go a little bit more conservative in a portfolio, but you can't count on the same historical returns within the fixed income portion of your portfolio. And we have to prepare for that. And once again, when we're projecting out 25, 30 years of lower than 5% returns in a significant portion of your portfolio, that's trouble. That's barely enough to keep up with inflation. So,
yeah. So to kind of wrap that up, that was sort of the three, the three myths. What conversations when somebody comes in and, let's say they're 60, 62 years old and they're going, hey, I got this kind of target at 65, and I want to start to put together an income plan, or I want to look at a withdrawal rate. What could potentially be my withdrawal rate, or can I plan on what I normally spend every month, or do I need to do this, or do I need to reduce that amount, or how do I need to invest my assets? What's sort of the one, or maybe a couple different versions of conversations that you all have with clients when they come in? What you say, okay, we don't look at, let's pretend that the myths, they don't bring them up, but what are some of the things that you all lay out to say, here's what you need to consider when you are putting together a plan today. Here's some of the things that you need to consider when putting together a plan.
Yeah, I mean, I'll kind of go back to where I was talking about like the levers. I feel like, again, I want to know what's your lifestyle like. What do you want your lifestyle to be like? What's the difference from where as you've been accumulating and saving and being diligent, and now you're gonna start paying yourself? What are the differences? What did you imagine would be different? Because they've had that conversation a bunch of times.
Yeah.
With friends. And the funny thing is, a lot of them have never really had a good open, honest conversation, certainly not a good heated debate in a lot of circumstances. And so it's interesting as they kind of start getting that out, they're like, oh, I didn't know that. Pretty substantial thing to talk about, right? So I want to talk about what's the difference between how you've lived and how you want to live.
Yep.
And are the things that we're talking about, the amount of money you need, the savings, the investment strategy, does this make sense? And so I always like to ask that in the very first meeting. And then, after you get through like the first kind of round of audits and you're coming back with suggestions and that, does this feel right? Like, this is what I heard you say.
Yep.
And then I'll kind of, you could use like a tailoring a suit analogy a little bit. Like, you asked me for this size, you asked me for this, but like, is this actually like feel nice? Like, do you want to go out to dinner in this suit? Right? That's kind of where I feel like you want to set that baseline that's not a financial thing, not numbers. And then when you come back on the other side, are we using the numbers in the right way to feel like this is something you save for your whole life and you'll be excited to step into this new chapter?
Yeah. I don't have too much to add on to that. I think really it's more or less knowing what their plan A for retirement is, ideally. And this is, we weed out a lot of this when we're doing our discovery meetings. But, I don't want to call it an interview, but it's really, we're trying to get to know you as well as we possibly can. And we want to know, ideally, okay, this is, to the point he just made, this is what you had in your mind. This is exactly what you want. If this were different, would that be okay? If that were different, would that be okay? We need to kind of figure out when we're trying to present options to you, what types of options or how far down the line we should go when, maybe projecting out some different things. And we also want to tease out some things that maybe they've never even considered as well.
Yeah, sure.
Because so many times we start talking about it. It's funny because I start asking questions about how long did your parents live? How long, how long did your grandparents live? What, and you start getting a little bit morbid and you hate to ask some of these questions, but we need to find out, how did they die? Because genetics is a real thing. And if we find out, oh yeah, both my parents lived to the age of 90. Okay, well, we need to prepare for that. Did they ever go to long-term care? Have you ever, thought about if something were to happen to you or your wife and you need to go into a facility for a few years? Have you budgeted that into your plan?
Yeah.
And so things like that they've never even considered, we need to make sure that we're trying to present, a few different alternatives for what could potentially happen for them throughout their retirement and prepare for them.
Yeah, I totally agree, and we all know because we sit on meetings together. But we certainly have those conversations with clients or even prospects. But I would say the one thing I would add is the one conversation I like to have is when it comes to cash flow. So when it comes to this 3 to 4% withdrawal rate, I don't buy that. We talked about that. The 70 to 80% of your current income, I don't buy that either. I don't think anybody works hard to then live off less. I just don't buy that. We've already said that if you were retired 65 and you could live another 25, 30 years, I just don't buy that you need to be conservative. I think the one conversation that I have with clients is, in addition to what you guys talked about, is just what is the probability of your assets as you've accumulated over the course of your life going to provide you the income that you said you wanted? Whatever that number is, doesn't make any difference to me, but what is the probability of your assets being able to sustain that income from now until the next 20, 30 years? I think that's really the conversation. Is just what's the probability, what's the likelihood of your assets doing that? I don't care if it's a 1% withdrawal rate or 10% withdrawal rate. It doesn't make any difference. It comes down to what's the probability of your plan being successful, right? I think that's the key, which leads to our next show, make sure that you catch it. We're talking about what is your retirement number. It's going to be kind of funny. We're going to start off the show talking about a commercial that came out about 15 years ago, and you guys will remember it. It's kind of cool. But anyway, so that's the show for today. I appreciate you guys. Well, I appreciate you guys jumping in here and recording, and I appreciate you guys watching. Again, if you like the content, make sure you share it. What is it? Share it. Something. There's a whole. I don't
like,
know.
subscribe,
subscribe,
share, review.
Yeah, there you go. All right. Listen, you guys tune in next week. We're going to be talking about what's your retirement number. We'll explain what that means, and have a good week. We'll talk to you guys next week.
Thank you.
Thanks.
The information given herein is taken from sources that IFP Advisors, LLC, doing business as Independent Financial Partners, IFP, IFP Securities, doing business as IFP, and its advisors believed to be reliable, but it is not guaranteed by us as to accuracy or completeness. This is for informational purposes only, and in no event should be construed as an offer to sell or solicitation of an offer to buy any securities or products. Please consult your tax and/or legal advisor before implementing any tax and/or legal related strategies mentioned in this publication, as IFP does not provide tax and/or legal advice. Opinions expressed are subject to change without notice and do not take into account the particular investment objectives, financial situation, or needs of individual investors. This report may not be reproduced, distributed, or published by any person for any purpose without IFP's express prior written consent. Securities offered through IFP Securities, LLC, doing business as Independent Financial Partners, IFP, member of FINRA and SIPC. Investment advice offered through IFP Advisors, doing business as IFP, a registered investment advisor. IFP and Family Wealth Planning Partners are not affiliated. The information given herein is taken from sources that IFP Advisors, LLC, doing business as IFP, IFP Securities, LLC, doing business as IFP, and its advisors believed to be reliable, but it is not guaranteed by us as to accuracy or completeness. This is for informational purposes only, and in no event should be construed as an offer to sell or solicitation of an offer to buy any securities or products. Please consult your tax and/or legal advisor before implementing any tax and/or legal related strategies mentioned in this publication, as IFP does not provide tax and/or legal advice. Opinions expressed are subject to change without notice and do not take into account the particular investment objectives, financial situation, or needs of individual investors.